Hope you enjoyed that short break. Now we're going to move into some industry and government sessions I think you're going to enjoy. It'll be right up here where the dialogue will start here and work into the audience as we go through the sessions. The first session is Modernization Strategy, so we're going to take a look at what's been discussed quite a bit from the platform over the course of today and a little bit yesterday. And then as we talk about the Modernization Strategy, we're then going to turn to the panel for discussing solutions. Our moderator today is Mr. Tom Davis. Some of you have met him already. He's a senior fellow and industry chair at the Defense Acquisition University. Tom spent 25 years in the military, retiring as a colonel in 1997. After his military service, Tom worked with Northrop Grumman as a senior defense analyst, during which time he was asked to help coordinate corporate homeland security programs, following the 9/11 attacks. He then moved to General Dynamics, where he served in a variety of positions evaluating trends in the national security, federal and civil sector, and international markets to identify emerging business opportunities. Tom has been a great friend of AFCEA. His current position is with Defense Acquisition University. He's also an author. He might want to talk about that. But please join me in welcoming Tom Davis as your moderator, and he'll introduce your panel, and we'll get going. Tom?
Thanks very much, Mike. I guess the microphone's working. I think I can actually hear myself for a change, so that's good. I want to thank AFCEA for pulling this event together. I've been articulating quite a bit to all the audiences I get at DAU about the difficulty that it's perceived to exist in the industry about communicating with the customer in the modern environment, and the reasons that we need to get over that so that we can have a sharing of information on what are the emerging needs and what are the emerging technological solutions. So again, Bob Shea and Bob Wood and Mike, thank you for all your work that you've done to pull this together. Bob Wood and I both taught on the faculty at West Point back in the early 80s, and our boss was a magnificent guy named Don Olvey, who used to have an observation about West Point that change at West Point was only obvious to a very practiced observer. Well, I think change that I'm seeing in the U.S. Army doesn't take a lot of practice. It's pretty obvious without having a long history. I also did find it kind of interesting watching General Mingus and General Morrison this morning. I'd mentioned General Morrison over lunch that in Desert Storm, Major Ray Ordierno was my DeVarty executive officer. And I thought that probably someday he might be the chief of staff of the Army. I had no idea he was going to be the father of a fashion icon, so that everybody was going to be looking somewhat like him. And I don't know why you're still wearing hair.
I don't either.
As I'm looking out here, I see the 101st Commander. Yeah, he's following the mode. So I'm going to report to Ray and Linda that his image is living on, even though he's gone down to Pinehurst to play golf. It's a very complex world that we live in. I was talking with a few of you that when I first started out in the Army, we had the VRC-12 series of radios. And they had been fielded prior to Vietnam in 1963. And when I first started as a second lieutenant in the 2nd and 6th Artillery, I had the VRC-12 series, a couple of variants to it. When I was a captain, I had the VRC-12 series. When I was a major in Korea, I had the VRC-12 series. And when I went back to command the very same battalion I'd started out with as a second lieutenant, I had the VRC-12 series radios. I think the only thing that ever changed was the matching unit on the antenna. That's obviously not the case today, and I think from all the diagrams that we've seen that have been so wonderfully presented by everyone who's had a speaking role down here today, that it's obvious that we are in a moment of great change, and we're also at a moment, because technology is changing so much, that we actually have to have much greater cooperation and much greater understanding between the provider base and the customer base. The VRC-12 was built by a company called AVCO, which started out as an airplane company. AVCO actually standing for Aviation Corporation, changed its name to AVCO later on, merged with somebody else. So the residue of it right now is in Textron. But that just shows the changes that we've had in both the industrial base as well as in the needs because of the mission changes with the consumer. I also wanted to point out to Colonel Joe Foley over there from the UK that I went to a Defense Industry Initiative Group meeting at CSIS a couple weeks ago, and I didn't even know this, but it turns out that the National Defense Industrial Act of 2017 officially has declared the British, Canadian, and Australian industrial bases to be part of the American industrial base and to be treated as such. So welcome to the club, and I guess we're over that burning of the White House now. Let me introduce my panel. You've all met General Gallagher, who is the director of the network CFT, the cross-functional team, and he'll be talking more about that, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that already. To his right, Karl Dalstad from Cisco, who runs he's the director of enterprise network systems for them. Next to him, John Davis from Palo Alto, who has the booth out behind the wall up here that I'd invite you all to go take a look at. He's vice president for Federal Chief Security Operations, also retired Major General U.S. Army. Ken Peterman to his right from Viasat. He's the president of government systems there. And down on the end, Bill Weiss, vice president, general manager of ground systems from General Dynamics Mission Systems, old colleague of mine from days gone by there, and it's been a real pleasure to have a chance to see him again. So I think what we're going to do, talking earlier with the panelists here, we're going to start with General Gallagher, let him add to and articulate and enhance some of the comments that he made earlier today, and then we'll just go from his right down to left. Each of the panelists will have about 5 to 6 minutes to offer some observations that they might have about what they've heard today and what they'd like their group to hear. I'll ask a few questions, and with the time we have left prior to 3:30, we'll open it up to the floor. General?
Okay. Well, thanks, Tom, and I am honored to be up here with my esteemed colleagues here from industry. Some of us go back a few years, and it's a great opportunity here to be here, and I thank Jim Mingus for pulling this together and with this great support of AFCEA to pull this collective team together. So this notion of a cross-functional team or a cross-functional team concept, I mean, it's not new to anybody here. I mean, we've stood up operational planning teams. We've had, as Jim mentioned earlier during lunch, joint planning groups, and a lot of joint task forces and task forces stand up for a variety of reasons to solve some very complex problems. And as the Army rolled out last year at AUSA, its 6 modernization priorities, back on 6 October, there was a letter signed from the Under Secretary of the Army, then Acting Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, laying out the 6 modernization priorities and the notion of the cross-functional teams. That wasn't the day it was born. That had been in the works for well over a year. There had been a team working agile acquisition in the background, trying to figure out how to move the ball forward, much like the Army Futures Command concept. It was rolled out this past week, but it wasn't a new design. It's been in the work for years, believe it or not, this construct of pivoting and changing the Army. But after AUSA of last fall, on the 23rd of October, the announcement was made on who the cross-functional team leaders would be. To be honest, I didn't think it was going to be me. I mean, any one of us, and we've been working this network for about a year, or well over a year, between John Morrison, Jim Mingus, myself, Gary Martin, now Dave Bassett at the PEO C3T, and other teammates, Brian Minnis from the G357. We've had a collective team of teams really working as a collaborative cross-functional team for quite a while, working this network modernization strategy. When I saw the announcement on the 23rd of October, I was a little bit shocked. I actually thought somebody else would take the lead, and I would just keep rowing and supporting from the CIO G6. Immediately after being announced, I was told that I would not be dual-hatted, that my role I would basically, just because of the tyranny of the battle rhythm in the Pentagon, being on the Army staff, that I would disengage from the Pentagon, stay connected to the strategy, and stay linked and synchronized with General Crawford, the CIO G6, but basically establish the cross-functional team and stay focused on the team and building the team. So on the 1st and 2nd of November, we got our marching orders, and we had a session with the Under and the Vice We were sequestered down in the in the basement of the Pentagon, and all 8 of us, cross-functional team directors, came together, and we were given 2 days of kind of focused schooling on the expectations and what we were all about. And it was really about narrowing capability gaps by developing documents that will be informed by user experimentations, assessments, and technical demonstrations, and rapidly translate and transition leader-approved capability into the Army acquisition system. That's a mouthful, okay? But it's about getting soldier leader feedback as quickly as you can, as early as you can, to shape the future requirements and get those capabilities that, address some of our biggest concerns and some of the findings on the Institute of Defense Analysis study, which is the capabilities as delivered and the requirements as written are not meeting the operational needs of our soldiers. And so what are we all about? We were, as we started putting our charter together, it's about speed, getting capability to the lowest level and working flexible funding and direct coordination to get the capabilities out there with speed. But it's also about precision, trying to get it right sooner, okay? It doesn't have to be the 100% solution, but it's got to be good enough to be better than what we have and make a marked improvement on warfighting. There are some things that will take longer term, but there are some readily available solutions today that our soldiers deserve. And so that's where we're trying to go out and find, try, adapt, and buy solutions that allow us to get those capabilities. We were directed, fail early, fail cheap, but don't make failure your watchword, okay? And so as we take some risk and we run with scissors, so to speak, and really try to get some capabilities out there, the intent is fail quick, fail cheap, and then find something that doesn't fail and get it in the hands of soldiers. Okay, so we have several operating principles. Warfighter-driven, precision and speed. We are a direct report to the under and the vice. Okay, so I talked earlier about this IT Oversight Council. It's the same 2 leaders that are running the IT Oversight Council for the entire Army, those 4 joint capability mission areas. But all 8 cross-functional team directors report directly to the under and the vice, and we've been in and out of multiple sessions with them. Okay. The other thing is we're outcome-focused, not process-focused, or not process-driven. Okay. The Army has processes for a reason, but we are not to be held hostage by the process. We are to work by, with, and through our collective team of teams and accelerate the Army and the institution despite the processes that we're dealing with. And so in certain cases, like the Army Requirements Oversight Council, we can streamline that process. As long as we have the collective parallel staffing going on, we can go directly to the under and the vice to get things like directed requirements rapidly approved. And so we're working through those types of things. So the deliverables, our strategic capability roadmap, which got approved in January, a battle rhythm and regular project updates, which have been ongoing. We had a 5-hour session with General Milley and Secretary Esper last week. That was our second 4 or 5 hour session with General Milley. It's about deliverables, though. Capability and user assessments, requirements documents, and acquisition transition plans. And for many cases, the acquisition transition plan relates to our science and technology portfolio that the Research and Development and Engineering Command have been working for years, but in many cases, a lot of these science and technology initiatives never transition. So we are working not only to pull together the requirements, the funding, and the acquisition community, but it's also the S&T community, and try to ensure that we are investing in the best solutions and trying to make sure that we reinvest. We're willing to divest of programs that may not deliver, and especially in the S&T portfolio, and really invest in those things that we can accelerate that will actually transition to one of our programs or a new program. So the metrics that it's about focused initiatives to narrow and reduce the capability gaps, alignment of the requirements and capability documents with our roadmap, assessing the operational risk and technological feasibility and performance metrics. So the team consists of folks from Army Materiel Command, CCOM. I've got an acquisition logistician that's got a PhD in acquisition logistics, and she's been downrange multiple times. I have representatives from Army Contracting Command. We have teammates from Army Test and Evaluation Command, and we also have an indirect link with DOT&E, Kristen Alexander, and Brian Hamilton and Mr. Daly have been involved with our team from the beginning. And Major General Cedric Wins in the RDECOM team and CERDEC. I've got multiple research and development engineering centers, both Picatinny and up at Aberdeen, that are involved in our team. ForceCom, the G3 and the G6, we have representatives to help us ensure that what we're trying to do, we have operational units that allow us the opportunity to get that soldier and leader feedback. TRADOC has been all in supporting us, especially Jim Mingus and John Morrison. John's aligned a colonel and a Chief Warrant Officer 5 from the Cyber Center of Excellence, and Jim Mingus has aligned a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, and a major with the network cross-functional team. The Army National Guard has given me a colonel. Army Reserve Command is going to give us a major. He'll arrive this month. We have an Australian liaison. We're going to get a British liaison this summer to work some of the joint the coalition interoperability issues. We have linkage to the United States Marine Corps and SOCOM and all that. The team, it sounds like it would be really huge. Okay, we're relatively small team. It's about 30 folks, but we're distributed. Okay, we're established. Our headquarters right now is at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. I have some folks up at Aberdeen, and as I mentioned, a couple folks down at Fort Gordon with John Morrison, and some folks here at Leavenworth with Jim Mingus and that LNO up at Picatinny. It's a great team. It's coming together. We're getting some reps and sets and really kind of building as we go. As I talked to you earlier today about the big strategy and as it relates to kind of the entire Army network and all things IT, what we are focused on is inside that warfighting mission area. And those 4 lines of effort, the unified network transport, the joint and coalition interoperability, the command post mobility and survivability, and the common operating environment, we are either leading or in support of all 4 of those lines of effort. The first 2 are the ones we're really leading. That's next generation transport and joint and coalition interoperability. In the command post and the common operating environment, we are in support of Jim Mingus and his team, but it really is a collaborative effort. And so we're operating in such a way where we can kind of finish each other's sentences because we are so well-versed collectively in the actual strategy and the execution of that strategy. I look forward to any questions that come up. Again, some of the teammates up here with me are a part of the solution without a doubt. I mean, obviously Cisco is, they provide the guts of much of what we do. We've got John Davis, representing not only this, cyber community, but Palo Alto networks, tremendous capability in cyber defense, and Viasat, they're doing a lot in space, and they've got their own constellations out there, but they're also providing a lot of capabilities in terms of gateways and connectivity to the tactical data link networks that we, the Army, have not necessarily explored and exploited to our advantage. And then obviously General Dynamics, a partner for years, a lead system integrator over the years for a multitude of Army networks that we fielded in the past, and have a big stake in the Army game. So I am honored to be up here on the table with these great teammates and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Gallagher. And let me just take this moment, in case we don't get it at the end, to thank you for all you're doing in this particular effort. I know that it's always a bit of a shock and always a bit of an annoyance to find out that you've got a major additional duty as assigned. And I'm sure this came as a surprise, as they usually do. So thanks for taking it on and putting it together as quickly as you obviously have. Karl?
Thank you very much, General Gallagher and Tom. I met General Gallagher when he was a colonel, and we supported him on CENTCOM and the CENTCOM AOR. We assisted at that time with the Afghan Mission Network and the Black Core design out of the RTP facility that Cisco has. And I'm very honored to be amongst the general officers up here. I have a very different background. I was a mid-level captain. Actually, I'll start back. I was a young lieutenant coming across the border between Texas and New Mexico when I heard this character I've never heard of before named Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So somebody who had joined Army ROTC to get through school all of a sudden was thrown into something that was rather interesting. And I did my time there. I got out. I finished up in the reserve unit in Charlotte, thought I was done, met my lovely wife around the Fort Bragg area, married, ended up in Raleigh. And then I get a FedEx on my doorstep in February of 2003 saying, welcome back per Presidential Directive X, Y, and Z. And went to work for a year, left the company, went to work at the J2 Information Systems Division at CENTCOM under General John Custer, actually, at the time. I think he was the J2. And so I have, at that time, I was kind of feeling like Will Ferrell in Talladega Nights, sweet baby Jesus, help me. And it was actually the beginning of an interesting career because at Cisco now I have done everything from channels management to account management to strategic account management, operations director for various parts of the DoD, and now I am an overlay to the Senior Vice President of Public Sector working in one of our 4 verticals, enterprise networking, our other 3 being security, data center networking, and unified communications. So bear with me. I thought I was actually going to come up originally and speak on software-defined networking, and I found out it was more about partnering with industry, so that's all good because I have some experience with that too. I will say that unprecedented demands are being placed on the network now. And you have to understand where Silicon Valley is coming from, Cisco obviously being a Silicon Valley firm. We've adopted a new IT methodology called Fast IT, for those of you who are familiar with that. And that's basically encompassing the Internet of Everything, IoT, mobility, cloud, security, analytics, all in a rapidly developing fashion, right? When we launch internal network or internal software, because we're even becoming more of a software company now, software applications, we are doing agile development on those. So there isn't a day that goes by that we're not getting 4 or 5 notices to upgrade X, Y, and Z. Why is that? Because our developers are putting to market at the same time that they're developing. That is like the speed of lightning, right? And the government, understandably, because of your FARs and your procedures, can't quite keep up with that level of development. But you have to understand where our leadership is coming from. When I go out there, I actually have to be a lobbyist and a bit of a proponent for the public sector. That not just includes DoD, but the federal civilian government and state, local education, and even higher education, because they don't think public sector. They don't think that at all. They're thinking on a global scale, right? And each of our business unit managers are gauged on how quickly they come to market with a product and what the margins are on that product and how quickly the revenue ramps on that product. And so a lot of the concerns you have that revolve around certifications and so forth can fall by the wayside. So in this new network, this new world of networking, we're going to be seeing 63 million new devices online every second come the year 2020. Network operations spend tends to be 3 times the cost of the original capital equipment outlay cost for the network. And most entities have a 6-month delay to breach detection. What I found pretty amazing, and we have senior leaders from the Department of Defense and the government come out to meet with our senior executives. When we do that, we bring in what we call the Cisco on Cisco team. We have taken some very experienced and august members of our internal IT organization, and we have turned them actually into presenters. So these are folks that have 8 to 12 to 15 to 20 years of experience in rolling out Cisco's internal IT. And what we always get questioned, the question we always get posed to us is, how do you guys roll out your network? How do you guys defend your network? And what do you do when you get a breach? 3 years ago, we would reconfigure the whole network within 2 hours. That in and of itself is pretty phenomenal. As of today, we reconfigure the network on the fly. And the way we do that is through software-defined networking. Because what happens now is that we've abstracted the network services from the underlying network node. In layman's terms, it can get pretty complicated, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking a user or a device or a thing, and you are taking the IP address, the need for an IP address, away from that person. You then attach a profile to that individual so that their services and profile follows them wherever they go globally. So we have rolled out what we call the next generation of networking called digital network architecture. And at the heart of this is basically a server that's really souped up with multi-cores and lots of memory and various engines, the network data platform and the APIC EM, which essentially abstract all of that and create a virtual network. So now it's as easy as drag and drop. Through security group tagging and a lot of other fancy protocols, you can just drag and drop communities of interest, and you no longer have to assign IP addresses. How did we develop networks and privacy in the past? VLANs. No need for VLANs anymore, right? And VLANs get very complicated because you layer them on top of each other. Then you get into DMVPN issues. And then you start getting spanning tree issues. I remember as a new account manager at Cisco, one of my first accounts was headquarters Air Force Combat Command at Langley Air Base. I went there and they were complaining about the performance of the 7500 series router that was the gateway out to the AFNet. Our engineer looked at it and he said, well, you've got 18,000 access control lists on this router, right? No wonder why it can't route. You're using it as a security device, basically. And so all of this is a thing of the past now. We've moved past this, and we are moving into the world of software-defined. So Cisco, you're going to see more and more, is becoming actually more of a software-centric company. Pivoting back to partnering with industry, what I do want to mention is that there are some things that we've noticed that would really help from the government side of the house. When we have engineers out at the TIC and the JITIC doing the security testing, many of them don't have security clearance contracts. We aren't a systems integrator, right? We're a manufacturer. So although we have contracts with other entities in the government, JSOC, SOCOM, and many others, those guys out there don't have a platform on which they can place their clearance. So that sometimes prohibits the interaction. They're sort of treated like third-class citizens at times until we can beg, borrow, or steal somewhere where we can put them on contract. So that would be a very pedestrian but simple and effective thing that could assist industry in getting certifications done. Also, the reciprocity of certifications across the DoD would help a lot. If we certify, let's say, software-defined networking for the Army, we want to take it to the Navy says you got to go out to our labs in San Diego. We want to go to the Air Force, nope, you got to go up to the AFRL and certify it with the Air Force network as well. It costs industry manufacturers such as us or Palo Alto or anybody else around $500,000 to $1 million to certify any given product to put it through the JITIC testing and FIPS. We have 170 products on the APL, so you do the math, it adds up. I'm not crying in my beer. All we're saying is that there are things there that can assist us with reciprocity so we don't have to duplicate those certifications over and over again. Sponsoring our products for certification. That's not difficult, but sometimes it takes just a little bit of bravery. Someone just saying, hey, I'm going to certify this product, right, rather than let it sit there. Why do they sometimes sit there? I'll give you an example on that, too. There are many times not categories for the newest products coming into the industry. There is no category now for software-defined access. There's no category for application-centric infrastructure. There's no category for the digital network architecture at all. And quite honestly, for any of our virtual products, there's no category. So we do unnatural things at times. For example, we took ACI and put it on the AS-LAN certification path. And we also took some other products and we had to put them through network management, like the DNA Center. So all that said, certifications, reciprocity, time. We have a product now that's been tested as of last month, ready to go, 3 to 4 months for paperwork to get through. And then finally, updating the UCR would be awfully useful. I know it was updated in 2013, but essentially it was minor revisions off of 2008. And it still really needs to be brought, I think, into the 21st century from that perspective. And if you partnered with industry, we'd be happy to put some brain trust into that. I'm sorry I spoke a little bit too long. I need to introduce my cohort here from Palo Alto. Thank you very much for your time.
Despite what you might think, I'm no relation to John Davis. I think that I'm Tom Davis, and he's John Davis. Shows that our parents had absolutely no originality. But I do have a brother named John Davis, but he's not this John Davis. So with that introduction, John, you can take it from there and tell us all you know about cyber defense.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be surrounded by AFCEA camouflage. Don't be fooled by the bright colors. My wife buys all this stuff for me. Apparently, I don't have a fashion bone in my body. My heart's with the subdued camouflage. It's an honor to be here to share some thoughts with all of you, and especially some some old friends and teammates about this topic. I need to warn you up front, I'm not the greatest expert at modernization. I never set foot in an acquisition organization. I think the last time I purchased something as a government agent was when I was in the 2nd Ranger Battalion as the S4, Kevin. But, having spent 35 years in the military, most of which was in Airborne Ranger and Special Operations Unit, I know a little bit about military operations. And having spent the last almost 3 years in industry, quite an eye-opening experience in industry. And I can tell you, 3 years in industry is a long time in today's modern world. So I'd like to share some thoughts with you about lessons learned from those two categories, my personal experiences. And a lot of this I think you probably are not going to find new, but you might look at things through a little bit of a different lens. And it's kind of a reminder of some of the key principles about why we are, as a partnership here between industry and the Army, why we are doing the things that we're doing. I actually thought about this because I read a post from my good friend General Gallagher on LinkedIn, and he referenced back to a post from a guy, we won't hold this against him, he's a C-17 commander. His name is Kurt Degerland. But he was talking about leadership in the modern age. And he referenced, of course, John Boyd of, OODA Loop fame. But the other reference he used was General Stanley McChrystal and a book called Team of Teams. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend you put it on your reading list, because what was discovered by General McChrystal and the changes he took his special ops organization through about a little over a decade ago are very, very relevant to what we're talking about now. And I went back, and Pete, you caused me to go dig up my book, Team of Teams, and I wanted to find how to encapsulate what I was talking about here. So I went to the foreword. And the foreword was written by a guy named Walter Isaacson. He's CEO of the Aspen Institute. So I'm going to plagiarize a little bit and read just a little bit of the foreword so you understand why I think this is important. And Walter said, high-speed networks and digital communications mean that collaboration can and must happen in real time. The distributed, decentralized, and web-like architecture of the Internet empowers each individual to be a collaborator. Likewise, the necessity of real-time innovation and problem-solving requires integrative and transparent leadership that empowers individual teams. And then he goes on to say, the experience of General McChrystal and his colleagues taught them that complexity at scale has rendered traditional industrial age management ineffective for solving the issues of our network world. Efficiency is necessary but no longer sufficient to be a successful organization. It worked in the 20th century, but it's now quickly overwhelmed by the speed and exaggerated impact of small players such as terrorist startups and viral trends. And so what he talked about needing to move on to were management models that were based on planning and predicting instead of resilient adaptation to changing circumstances are no longer suited to today's challenges. And it required dramatic shifts in mental and organizational models, as well as sustained efforts on the part of leadership to create the environment for such change. So how did he do that? General McChrystal did it through three main ways: information sharing, through decision-making authority, changes in the way that was done, and the third way was in the role of leadership. For information sharing, he essentially created three techniques: a daily operations and intelligence briefing that was available to everybody throughout the entire task force, including key shareholders, partners who had a stake in the operations and the combined or the common objectives. The second thing that he did was he made the different teams that were within his task force, teams of operators, teams of intel analysts, teams of logisticians, legal experts, he made them live together, walk in their own shoes, and learn what each other did to break down both the physical and the organizational barriers between these teams. Kind of reminds me of the cross-functional team approach. And the third thing he did was he even expanded that beyond his organization and created a network of L&Os to essentially create a network of networks to fight what was essentially a network. On decision-making, he made a bold decision to decentralize decision-making and make the organization as flat as possible. Decision-making resided with the person on the ground who was in the best position to make that decision. It's a very, very risky approach, but the old way of all the information in an organization flowing up to inform centralized decisions at the top couldn't keep up with his challenge at the time, the Al-Qaeda and Iraq threat. So the fourth, or the other thing that he did was define the role of leadership. And this is where I think it really would behoove us as leaders to reflect on what we're doing right now and make sure that besides these other mechanisms of sharing information and cross-fertilizing and decentralized decision-making to the appropriate level so that we can be agile and we can operate at scale, what's the role of the leader in doing that? And the role of the leader is to create a sense of common vision, shared purpose, and making sure that people in that organization understand how they fit in the overall process. I think that those lessons are just as relevant to this effort today as they were a decade ago. And I would suggest that they're relevant in all elements of the public and private sector, because the only constant today is change. And change is accelerating at an exponential rate. So the only way to keep up with it in any external environment, especially the digital environment, is to take this kind of approach. Now, I'll talk just briefly about my industry experience. In industry, I don't know how many of you have heard of this term, but it's called Devops. If you've heard of it, great. If you haven't, I did a quick Google search to explain it to you. DevOps is a software engineering culture and practice that aims at unifying software development and software operation. And it's essentially a continuous loop of feedback that as you go through and you plan and build and provide continuous integration and iterative integration, the ops community is built into this to deploy it, to operate it, and provide continuous feedback to the development community. The only thing that I would add to that is DevSecOps. I would say the security function needs to be embedded in that. But it's the same concept. It's the concept of shared responsibility. It's feedback loops and much tighter cycles, and it gets rid of silos and it gets rid of autonomous organizations. That's what's going on in industry. Industry knows how to do that very, very well. That is a model that we should study and really learn how to take advantage of. Another model that I think is happening out in industry, and I would call this a best practice too, because I found it pretty amazing that industry, we create all kinds of partnerships, strategic partnerships, even with competitors out there. I'll just use my company as an example. To do what we do in cybersecurity functions, we know we can't do that alone. For us to be able to, we were started as a physical firewall company. For us to do what we do in the virtual environment, like with WinT, we had to technically integrate with VMware to be able to provide those capabilities. For us to operate in a cloud environment, no matter what kind it is, we've got to build deep technical integrated solutions with Amazon, Microsoft, Google Cloud, and others. Those type of partnerships that are going on out in industry, what does that mean for you? That means you no longer, and this is a criticism because I was part of this too when I was in the military, you no longer have to go out and buy bits and pieces. Packages are available for you. I think that makes you much more agile, much more adaptable, and it enables you to, it gives you the flexibility to deal with change on a much more abbreviated time schedule. These deep technical partnerships and strategic partnerships that are pretty commonplace out in industry are, in my opinion, something you're not leveraging enough of, and you should be leveraging more. And then finally, the last thing I would tell you is another best practice that I have seen and believe is very effective at reducing complexity, at reducing your need to devote time, money, people to, at giving you more agility and flexibility because of all of these partnerships that I've been talking about that I don't think you're leveraging the way you should, are things like enterprise agreements, enterprise licensing agreements, enterprise support agreements. These are package deals instead of piecemeal, bits and pieces deals. This is a way for you to, now, it requires trust. It requires that if you're going to enter into a partnership with an organization, the trust has to be built there because you have to believe that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and that there's confidence that what you're going to be doing is going to last over a longer term. But I guarantee you, it is a much more effective model at being able to deal with very, very rapid change at both speed and scale. So I would recommend those three things for consideration into how better leverage us in your challenge. And we all want you to succeed. We're all moving as fast and as hard as we can to make sure you're successful. We know how important it is.
Thanks very much, John. Ken?
Thank you. And John, I'm going to buy you a beer after this because I couldn't have got a better lead-in than that. I'll tell you that I was inspired by the discussion of the operational view by Generals Mingus and Morrison this morning because I think it lays a perfect construct for the Army to exploit the technology crossover and the private sector technology leadership that's available today. I'll give you an example of that. A WGS satellite, which we just made a commitment to spend $600 million in the President's budget and buy 2 more WGS satellites, 11 and 12. Let me characterize those for you. They were first launched in 2007. They have about 3 gigabits per second of capacity, and they have just a couple of nulling beams to deal with jamming. State of the art in 2007. Where have we been since then? Well, just to speak for my company, that's a satellite company, in 2011, we launched a satellite that had 140 gigabits per second of capacity, not 3, 140. Okay, that was 2011. In 2017, we launched one that had twice that, about 280 gigabits per second, and 24 months from now, we'll launch a terabit satellite, 1,000 gigabits per second satellite. What can you do with that additional capacity? You don't just support additional subscribers, but you can support additional speed, additional capacity. You can run more complex apps. You can run an active cyber defense. You can support smaller antennas and LPI, LPD waveforms and all those kinds of things, and we do that. In fact, these commercial satellite networks have been formally assessed through modeling and simulation against classified threats and found to be 3 orders of magnitude more effective than things like WGS and AEHF, and they're available today. So are we right in building a hybrid adaptive network that leverages them and exploits them and allows our warfighters to move among and roam among these different networks? We absolutely are. So there's $1 billion of investment going in to deal with the warfighter problem, and they're bringing the capability today. Our ANTSC 241 MMT multi-mode terminal is being demonstrated right now with the 508th and with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and it's experiencing 5 by 15, 5 by 20 megabits per second in terms of speed and capacity. That's game-changing. It allows you to stream video in high-def ways that you could never have done before. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, those are over third-party satellites. If you demonstrate that over our Viasat 2 satellite, we saw 100 to 130 megabits per second, and that allows you to stream video in a concurrent way, do video teleconferencing, watch multiple ISR streaming videos, and do concurrent operations in a way you've never been able to do before. So from a satellite technology perspective, we also talked about net management and making it easy to use, just like this is. Okay, so there's essentially no training when you give your 18-year-old and move them from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 8 or an iPhone 10. This satellite terminal is the same thing. About 30 minutes, you can set it up, you can operate it. It is achieving those objectives right now. The last thing I'll say is that can we deal with multiple security challenges? Yes, this MMT terminal operates on the same network that Air Force runs on, Air Force One, and the VIPSAM fleet operates on, and we routinely move them between multiple satellite constellations at KU and KA, commercial KA, MIL KA. We've even moved them between GEO and MEO an essentially seamless operation such that the principals in the aircraft have essentially the same IT experience in the air as they do in their office on the ground. So we're doing these kind of things and dealing with the multiple security dynamics of the POTUS has one security requirement, the NBC News reporter back in the back of the airplane has a different one, and we bring all that data off the airplane and we deal with that kind of multiple security issue today. Do we have clarity on the requirements as DoD and the Army move forward? I think we do. The young men and women that are growing up in a ubiquitous, connected world, when they put on that uniform and they go into harm's way, they want the same kind of ubiquitous connectivity and the same kind of cloud access. And we're finding ways to deliver that. I think General Gallagher mentioned that Viasat does some things besides SATCOM, and we do. We saw a need for a small Link 16 terminal that could go in rotary wing aircraft, and we built one in 17 months, and it was sole sourced onto the Apache. And I think Heidi Shue canceled the SALT program and said there's no reason to wait 5 years and spend a couple $100 million to run the procurement. This device is here and it's now. And we fielded that. We then, in 17 months, went from back of a napkin concept to successful operational assessment with a handheld Link 16 device that provides JTACs with digitally conveyed information to the close air support and is game-changing from a close air support perspective. And again, we saw the need to do that, and in 17 months brought a product that solved that problem, and then we gateway between the air-ground situation awareness with a product we call Mojo. So I think that if you reach out to the commercial and private sector, and look, these are our sons and daughters wearing these uniforms too. We can see the problems they have. We can see the capability gaps. Give us, when we have that insight, and I think we do, we're able to bring real technology capabilities forward that solve real problems. And we're not asking to pay the development cost. We're not asking to pay the non-recurring for us to field these satellite constellations. Try it, test it. Your philosophy is exactly right. Identify it, try it, test it in a contested environment. Test it in the presence of jamming. Test it in the presence of cyber threats. Look at the kinetic vulnerabilities of the ground infrastructure. Do data collection on the ground antennas and see how much better we really are. It's remarkable.
Thanks very much, Ken. I think that's a great example you used there about the industry's capacity to take existing product and make it adaptive and quickly transfer it into numerous and sometimes very different ways. And last but not least, Bill Weiss.
Thanks, Tom. General, I appreciate the recognition during your remarks at the outset that we've played a significant role over time in what the Army has today as its network. But we've also heard this morning, and certainly have heard loud and clear over the past several months, that what we've delivered is not sufficient to fight and win in a contested environment against a near-peer adversary. So we've certainly taken that to heart. I think we're approaching the problem much differently. We've changed internally. We've got, in addition to folks that are running the day-to-day programs that we're obligated to perform under, we've established an organization leadership that mirrors the Army's cross-functional team, and with an investment portfolio that is focused on the key requirements that we know we need to get after. So I'd just like to maybe make a couple of observations from an industry perspective on things that I think are important going forward. And the first one is a repeat, but just for emphasis, of something that General Morrison brought up earlier in his remarks, and that is the notion of open standards, and in particular, Internet Protocol routed network is the de facto standard. And one of the reasons that we have 63, I think was the figure that I heard from General Crawford last week in Huntsville. Part of the reason that we have 63 stovepiped networks that actually comprise the Army's network is that not all of them are based upon open standards. And so there's a couple of things, a couple of problems that I think we can get after, and one of them is to begin to converge. There's a lot of transport that is not shared that could be shared if it was accessible from clients and devices that are IP based. If those networks in turn are IP based, and also from a from an industry participation and an innovation standpoint, open standards-based approach, it will help foster innovation and participation and competition from multiple entities in industry. So I think that open standards-based, it sounds academic and simple and straightforward, and you get a lot of just, it's got to be open standards-based, but it's actually, I think it's critically important that as we move forward, that we make sure we're doing it that this is an internet protocol-based routed network. Another thing that I think is going to be important moving forward, and I've heard General Gallagher in particular emphasize this when he's been pressed for, a more traditional, do the requirements and then go build some stuff and do some experiments to not get so wrapped around the axle on the requirements, but just get technology into soldiers' hands and see what they do with it so that we don't preclude getting new and better capability out. So, and I think that's important, that initial experimentation kind of phase informs requirements, but just in general, keep the requirements at a minimum, keep them operational, warfighter, what do warfighters need, and avoid getting too prescriptive on things that are actually architecture and design related. And then, or a slightly different way to look at it maybe is just don't write requirements that actually could preclude new, better solutions and capabilities that we put into warfighters' hands. Another thing that I think is important moving forward, particularly as one of the things that I think is going to be happening is that we're moving away. We've heard from the chief and Army leadership that we have to avoid getting bogged down with long-term programs. The record Ken identified a couple that were short-circuited. But one of the things that oftentimes comes with programs of record is partnerships and collaboration. And General Davis, you mentioned the importance of that. So I think we need to make sure that as we move forward, we encourage industry collaboration and a system-level view how to move forward. And I'll give you a specific example of something that we were fortunate enough to be in the middle of that was enabled by having a program in place, but the program in place may not have been necessary. And this is the problem that got solved that might not have otherwise been solved, and that it seems to be relatively kind of mundane and straightforward, but I think it's a pretty good example, and that is that we have a small brick-sized, rugged computer that we worked on with an industry partner together with Cisco and Juniper, who virtualized their routers, which were normally appliances standalone, but that we were able to convince both of them to virtualize their routers to run on this computing platform along with some other network operations, network automation kind of applications. And what this in turn allowed us to do is to be able to eliminate some vehicles that would have comprised a command post, and we're working with the 25th Infantry Division on a mobile battalion command post kind of capability, enabled by this small brick computer that's got a bunch of stuff running on it that traditionally would have been running based with commercial off-the-shelf technology, but in a physical configuration that would have otherwise precluded it. And I think that came from that was industry collaboration and also a systems engineering kind of view. So as we move forward, I do think that that's important, that it isn't just a matter of pulling together a bunch of discrete individual technologies, but I think important innovation can come from a systems engineering approach to the overall network. And then finally, I'd close with this. I think that one of the things that's going to be critically important as we go forward is that we have a very tight and fast loop between prototyping and putting capability into soldiers' hands, and then based upon the experience that soldiers have, being able to feed that back and to tweak, and then to get out and build and field that capability. And so I think that the industry access not only to our traditional customers and now the cross-functional teams, but also to the soldiers who actually are using the stuff that we design and build, I think that's going to be critically important as we move forward, particularly for what we do that relies significantly on commercial industry. We want to take advantage of these advances, rapid advances, and the best way to do that, I think, is to have that tight loop and tight connection with the soldiers who are using this capability. So.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate the input from all the candidates. General Gallagher started out his comments, I think, earlier today talking about the Kansas basketball team. And I had to say, as a Kentucky boy, I wasn't happy that Kentucky came out on the short side of the Battle of the Wildcats, but we'll have to live with that. But nonetheless, in keeping with that metaphor, we do have the shot clock winding down. So I did want to ask one question of General Gallagher, and that would basically be this one. With your CFT role, there are in effect other CFTs that have been existing for a while up at the JROC joint level. The joint requirements boards themselves are actually kind of the CFT concept. Are you working with them, or at some point in time will you reach external to kind of go into the joint world to try to rationalize what we're doing in the Army, or else propagate what we're doing in the Army into the joint domain and to the domain of inter services?
Yeah, so one of the CFTs we're working with is currently working a project called Project Maven, which is it's actually a cross-functional team focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning. Right now, the emphasis is on ISR, and so there's a team being led by a Marine Colonel in USDI. Our team has sat down with them, and we're just kind of establishing that linkage and that relationship today. And then we've also got a really strong relationship with our teammates down at Fort Bragg in the JSOC community, and they've been working this DevOps construct that John Davis talked about for quite some time. Getting that feedback immediately to from the force to the service provider. And so we're not working with a JROC joint staff led necessarily cross-functional team. However, there are elements inside the Joint Staff J6 out of Norfolk that's really working with our Net Warrior Future Initiatives team. So we do have representation from the Joint Staff. They've got a really strong relationship with a lot of some of the non-traditional vendors that are providing solutions, and they've been cycling pretty fast. They've established a cross-functional team. It was established back when I think General Votel was at JSOC and General Bowman was on the Joint Staff as the J6. They established kind of a team to start working horizontal integration between the services and JSOC, and we are capitalizing on those relationships as we're standing up some of what we're doing. So I guess a long answer to a short question, yes, but probably not as broad as maybe we could be.
Okay. And I guess I'd like to ask Karl very quickly, coming from Cisco, a major company that by and large has commercial interest in terms of its customer base. Do you think that the culture in Cisco, I know you mentioned while we were talking earlier, you sometimes get some resistance about getting interest at the senior leadership in Cisco in the public sector. Do you think gatherings such as this and providing you an entree into the customer base that exists in the public sector allows you to better articulate the needs and the possibilities that are out there to your leadership higher up? Absolutely.
So we have had, but in a sporadic fashion, leaders from the government come out. What I kind of like is DISA usually will come out on a road trip, so to speak, and they'll hit all of the major Silicon Valley types, Google, Apple, Cisco, Palo Alto, and all the rest, and get a good flavor for what is going on in the industry. I'll tell you another thing that I think I would encourage the military leadership to do if they are willing is to formalize training with industry. We've had Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps officers and enlisted at Cisco. We have an E7 right now in our CSIRT organization in RTP who is learning how we defend our network internally. We were speaking earlier about Major General Ed Burke Wilson. He was a fellow with us in 2004, and now he is the senior cyber advisor, I believe, to the SecDef, if I'm not mistaken. So that type of interaction is invaluable if the military is so willing, I think. And, there's a lot of lessons learned on both sides. We learned from you some of the state-of-the-art needs in security out there in the real world. We were involved, believe it or not, in the Ukrainian dilemma. The Ukrainian government asked Cisco's security team to come out and help defend when the Russians were coming after the public transport system, the subway system. And then there's some things I think that you can learn from us at times. I remember General Bender, who was the former Air Force CIO just 2 years ago, asking how do you stop the infighting between the CIO and the CSO. And what our CEO did was he said, you know what, Rebecca, the CIO, John, CSO, I'm not only tying your compensation together, I'm giving you MBOs, which we call management by objectives. Those are basically objectives that they have to acquire if they want to be rated in a certain fashion, I guess you'd say, and be successful. And by doing so, we obviated what was going on, which was the security guys putting a halt to some really industry-leading networking initiatives in the company. And on the other end of the spectrum, the security folks were loosening up a little bit when they understood that they had a stake in what the networking folks were doing and vice versa. So I know that's not so easy for the government to be able to be that agile, perhaps, with regard to how you interface your senior leaders, but there are some lessons learned there because it's been very successful for us. We now can roll out in a unified fashion a lot of really cutting-edge technologies without infighting within the company. So those are just some examples, Tom.
Okay, thank you very much, Karl. Well, as Mike Warlick's presence up here indicates, the shot clock has already hit 0, and I don't have that Notre Dame woman's point guard to make that shot from the corner. Let me thank the panel for the participation here. And for those you hear from industry, I just wanted to point out something that's probably quite obvious to all of you. One of the great things about this particular forum is you've got everybody here from all the possible audiences in the Army that would be interested in getting your help on this. We've got people from GA, Nora Marcos here from the resource side. We've got over here, obviously, General Mingus and General Morrison from the Institutional Army, the Operational Army, and, of course, up here, General Gallagher, who represents the Headquarters Army staff, as well as this new interest that has been established by the Secretariat, the Secretary and the Undersecretary, in putting together these CFTs. So I would encourage all of you here from industry to take advantage of the opportunity because you've got here with you today in the room the full spectrum of the decision-making nodes that are going to exist in the Army moving forward in this very complicated area. And, of course, the Army is signaling with its presence here today that it wants your help, it needs your help, it values your help, and it looks forward to having your help. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tom.